One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a rancher headed out to move cattle across her vast Texas ranch. It was a routine task she had performed countless times, but on that fateful day, she never returned home. For 9 long years, her disappearance remained an absolute mystery. Neither she nor her pickup truck had ever been found. However, one day, a drilling crew working in a secluded desert area stumbled upon something metallic hidden deep underground. When they finally managed to extract the find, it shed light on a case that had tormented her family for nearly a decade. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on the Walker Ranch, casting long, broken shadows across the dusty, parched Texas landscape. Thomas Walker, his weathered hands stained with engine oil, leaned over the engine of his old but reliable John Deere tractor in the equipment shed. At 62, he had mastered most repairs himself, which not only saved money but also kept him occupied. The ranch had grown noticeably quieter over the past 9 years, ever since Savannah had vanished without a trace. He was just tightening a belt when he heard the distinct crunch of tires on gravel. Looking up through the open shed door, he spotted a police patrol car kicking up dust as it approached the main house. Thomas pulled a rag from his back pocket and, as quickly as possible, wiped the grease from his hands. It had been an incredibly long time since law enforcement had visited about Savannah's case. In the first year, they came with enviable regularity, but by the third year, the visits had ceased entirely. Thomas walked out to meet them, squinting in the bright sunlight. 2 officers emerged from the patrol car. He recognized one, Deputy Martinez, but the other, younger officer, he had never seen before. "Good afternoon, officers," Thomas called out, still fidgeting with the rag in his fingers. "What brings you here?" Deputy Martinez removed his hat, a gesture that immediately put Thomas on edge. It never boded well. "Mr. Walker, we need to speak with you. We found something." "Something?" Thomas felt his chest tighten with foreboding. "We believe we've located the truck your daughter was using the night she disappeared." Thomas let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "After 9 years? Where'd you find it? Bottom of the Rio Grande, maybe?" The officers exchanged glances, and Martinez's expression remained deadly serious. "No, sir. It was buried deep underground in the desert, not far from the ghost town of Terlingua." "Buried?" Thomas shook his head. "That sounds utterly impossible. Are you saying someone buried an entire truck?" "A drilling crew discovered it," the younger officer explained, his voice even. "They were setting up a new drilling station on an old site. When they started drilling, they hit metal. It turned out to be your daughter's truck." Thomas stared at them, the rag falling from his hands. The absurdity of it was overwhelming, but the officer's serious expressions convinced him this was no joke. "I can barely believe this nonsense," he muttered, his voice losing its former sharpness, becoming muffled. "We need you to come with us, Mr. Walker," Martinez said gently. "We need you to identify the truck. Confirm it's the one Savannah was driving. It's important evidence now." Thomas nodded slowly, his thoughts racing like wild mustangs. "Let me get things in order here." He turned and called out to Manuel, his ranch foreman, who was working in a nearby pasture. "Manuel, I need you to look after the place. I have to go with these officers." Manuel hurried over, surveying the scene with concern. "Everything all right, boss?" "They found Savannah's truck," Thomas said quietly, almost a whisper. "I'll be back as soon as I can." Thomas climbed into the back seat of the patrol car, his mind swirling with unanswered questions. The drive to the site took about an hour and a half, winding through the sparse desert landscape he knew like the back of his hand. As they neared Terlingua, he saw unusual activity from a distance. Numerous vehicles, including state police cars, were gathered around what looked like a massive drilling rig. When they finally arrived at the desert site, Thomas was struck by the organized chaos. Authorities and oil workers filled the area, with yellow tape cordoning off the perimeter, marking the boundary. In the center of it all stood a pickup truck covered in a thick layer of rust and dirt, suspended by heavy chains from a massive crane. Behind it, a huge, gaping hole drilled by the equipment yawned open. Thomas stepped out of the patrol car, his legs feeling unsteady on the sandy ground, as if he were treading on quicksand. A man in a sharp suit approached him. It was Detective Rodriguez of the state police, who had worked on Savannah's case during the intense early days. "Mr. Walker," Rodriguez extended a hand. "I'm truly sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances." Detective Thomas shook his hand, his gaze fixed on the truck, unable to look away. Rodriguez led him to a large man wearing an oil company hard hat. "This is Jim Patterson from the drilling company." "Jim, tell Mr. Walker what you've already told us." Patterson cleared his throat, preparing to recount the story. "Well, sir, this site was marked in our surveys as an abandoned drilling pad, dating back to the 1960s. When my crew arrived this morning, we noticed an unusually large boulder lying right where the old wellhead should have been. That struck us as extremely odd. Typically, old wells are just capped and marked, not covered with such massive boulders." Thomas nodded, trying to focus on the man's words while his eyes involuntarily kept drifting to the truck. "We moved the boulder and ran our standard ground penetration tests, but the old equipment must have interfered with our readings because we didn't detect anything unusual that would raise suspicion. We started drilling to reopen the well, and at about 15 feet down, we hit something that was neither rock nor soil. The driller immediately knew something was off. It was unlike anything he'd encountered." "So you dug it out?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with impatience. "We had to. Our detectors couldn't figure out what we'd hit. It took us a full 3 hours with an excavator to carefully unearth it. As soon as we saw it was a vehicle, we immediately called the authorities. I mean, why would anyone dump an entire truck down an oil well unless they were trying to meticulously hide something?" Thomas moved even closer to the truck, his heart clenching. Despite 9 years underground, it was remarkably intact. The dry desert conditions had preserved it better than he might have expected, though rust had already affected parts of the undercarriage and wheel wells. The front windshield was shattered where the drill had pierced it. "Someone deliberately dumped it here," Thomas said, his voice strained, almost trembling. "This is nothing like Savannah's usual route. She would never have driven to an oil well by herself. That's not her way." Detective Rodriguez nodded, confirming his words. "We haven't found human remains in or near the vehicle, but yes, this is certainly a crime scene. Someone went to significant effort to hide this truck, that's clear." "Can I see what was inside?" Thomas asked, his gaze pleading. Rodriguez led him into a temporary tent set up nearby. Under the harsh light of portable lamps, evidence bags lay on a folding table, each meticulously labeled and photographed. Thomas gasped as he recognized Savannah's personal belongings. Her leather wallet with a turquoise clasp, a hair tie with strands of her dark hair still wrapped around it, her small silver cross, which had once belonged to her mother. "These are hers," Thomas confirmed, his voice hoarse with surging emotion. He pointed to a multi-tool. "That's mine. I gave it to her for emergencies." His finger moved to a tire pressure gauge. "That's mine too. I told her to keep it in the truck always." A commotion at the site entrance drew their attention. Sheriff Clayton Ridge's SUV pulled up, thick dust swirling around it, as if heralding something important. The sheriff stepped out, adjusting his hat, and surveyed the scene carefully. Detective Rodriguez and Thomas approached to meet him. "Sorry I'm late," the sheriff said, slightly out of breath. "Got held up by a 3-car pileup on Highway 118. Had to wait for State Patrol to take over, and that took a while." "It's all right," Rodriguez said, nodding understandingly. Sheriff Ridge turned to Thomas, his expression softening, becoming more sympathetic. "Thomas, I'm truly sorry all this is happening. I know we've been searching for 9 years, and to finally find something like this, it's tough. It's good we found the truck," Thomas said cautiously but firmly. "But my daughter is still missing. We don't know if she's alive or dead, safe or suffering. This truck, unfortunately, explains nothing about her fate." "What about DNA samples?" Thomas asked Rodriguez, clinging to a last hope. "Maybe there's something that could tell us what really happened." "Forensics has collected everything they could find," Rodriguez assured him. "Hair fibers, possible blood samples from the seats, fingerprints, if any survived in these conditions. It will take at least several days to process everything in the lab. It's meticulous work. The oil company's supervisor, Patterson, approached the sheriff, his face showing impatience. "Sheriff Ridge, can we resume operations in the adjacent area? We have contracts to fulfill. Time is of the essence." "No," the sheriff said firmly, without hesitation. "This is now a crime scene. I'm expanding the perimeter, and work here will be suspended until the investigation is complete. We'll have an excavation team thoroughly examine the surrounding area to see if anything else is buried here that could shed light on this case." Rodriguez checked his phone, his gaze focused. "I need to get back to the station to review all case materials in light of this new, crucial evidence." "I'll take Thomas home," Sheriff Ridge offered, his tone calm and businesslike. "I still need to discuss something urgent with him anyway." Thomas looked at the two men, then slowly nodded in agreement. He followed the sheriff to his SUV, casting one last, long look at the truck that had been hidden from the world for 9 long years. The drive back to the ranch passed in complete silence. Sheriff Ridge keeping his eyes on the road while Thomas gazed at the familiar, yet now alien-seeming landscape rushing past the window. As they pulled up to the main house, the sheriff cut the engine and turned to Thomas, his face serious. "Do you mind if we talk in your office? I need to discuss something important with you." Thomas nodded, leading him through the house to his small office located at the back. The room was simple but functional. A desk cluttered with ranch papers, a filing cabinet, 2 chairs, and walls adorned with photos from cattle shows. Among them, a prominent picture of Savannah on her favorite horse, taken just months before her disappearance, stood out like a frozen moment of happiness. The sheriff settled into the chair opposite the desk, pulling out a small notepad and pen. He clicked the pen several times before speaking, as if gathering his thoughts. "Thomas, I need you to tell me about that night again. I know it's been a long time, and the case went cold by the 3rd year, but with this new evidence, we need to re-examine absolutely everything, every single detail." Thomas leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, his face etched with weariness. "I've told this story 100 times, Clayton, down to the last detail. I know, but tell me again, please." Thomas took a deep breath, steeling himself. Savannah was moving cattle that evening, as she often did. It was her usual task. She typically left the ranch around 8 in the evening in her truck. The drive from here to the western pastures takes about 45 minutes. She liked working late to avoid competition with the neighboring ranch. They sometimes use the same watering holes, and she always preferred to avoid any conflicts. The sheriff took notes, his pen gliding quickly across the paper. "Go on." "I was here, finishing up paperwork, when she didn't return by 11. I went looking for her. It was already dark. Night had fallen on the ranch. I found the cattle still in the pasture, but Savannah or the truck were nowhere to be seen. At first, I wasn't too worried. It seemed routine." Thomas's voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. "She was 28, Clayton, an independent woman who knew this land better than most. I thought maybe her truck broke down and someone gave her a ride, or she decided to stay out there overnight. She'd done that before, but she didn't come back. When I woke up the next morning and she still wasn't here, that's when I called you guys immediately." Thomas's jaw tightened, his face contorted with pain. "I've lived with that guilt ever since. If I had called that night, instead of waiting until morning, maybe what happened to her could have been prevented, who knows." Sheriff Ridge made a few more notes, then looked up with an expression Thomas couldn't read. It was inscrutable. "You said you went to bed. What time was that?" "Around midnight, after I came back from checking the pasture." "And you were alone here?" "Manuel and the other workers had gone home. They don't live on the ranch property." The sheriff leaned forward, his tone becoming more official. "Thomas, where exactly were you between 8 in the evening and the moment you went looking for her?" Thomas frowned, his brows furrowing. "I told you I was right here in this office the whole time. Can anyone corroborate that?" "What?" Thomas straightened in his chair, his voice full of indignation. "Why would anyone need to corroborate that? What exact time did you go looking for her? And why weren't you worried enough to search more thoroughly or call us immediately?" The questions came faster, the sheriff's tone shifting from conversational to overtly interrogative, piercing. Thomas felt heat rise to his neck, a precursor to mounting anger. Clayton, what the hell is this? You're completely missing the point. I didn't kidnap my own daughter. Why would I do that? What's the point? I didn't say you kidnapped her, the sheriff replied calmly but firmly, his voice remaining even. But we are obligated to consider all possible angles. In cases like this, family members are sometimes involved. It's part of our job. You're wasting your time if you think I did this. Thomas's voice turned hard as stone. I was here from 8 in the evening until 11, working on ranch accounts. Then I drove out to the pasture, spent about an hour looking around, and came back. And even if I wanted to, which is insane, I'm 62 years old. Do you really think I could have buried a truck under tons of desert sand overnight, unnoticed, leaving no traces without anyone seeing me? The sheriff made a few more notes, not looking up from his pad. What about your ranch hands? Where were they that night? Thomas slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing through the office. Now you're suspecting my whole damn ranch. Manuel has been with me for 20 years. He's like family. The other workers are good, decent people. I like to question them again. It's necessary. With all due respect, Sheriff, I don't respect what you're doing right now. You're wasting precious time that should be focused on real leads, on finding the culprits. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes burning. Want to do something truly useful? Pull the CCTV records from the roads around Terlingua and nearby towns for that night. Look for heavy trucks, excavation equipment, something that could have moved enough earth to bury a pickup. That's logical. Sheriff Ridge shook his head, his expression unyielding. That's not necessary at this stage, and we'd have to coordinate with the Terlingua department. That takes time. I know how to do my job. Thomas, believe me. Are you sure? Thomas stood, his voice laced with sarcasm. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're more interested in pointing fingers at me than finding out who actually buried that truck. That doesn't sound like an investigation. The sheriff also stood, closing his notepad as if to punctuate the conversation. I'm following procedure. It's my duty. Then follow it somewhere else. Check those road cameras. Talk to the oil company about who knew that well was there. Conduct a real, thorough investigation. Thomas moved toward the door, his patience exhausted. We're done here. If you want to talk to me again, it will only be at the station with Detective Rodriguez present, not before. He escorted the sheriff out of the house and watched him get into his SUV. They didn't shake hands or exchange pleasantries. The farewell was cold. The sheriff's tires kicked up dust as he drove away, leaving Thomas standing on the porch, his fists clenched at his sides, his body tense with anger. The man who was supposed to help find his daughter had just treated him like a suspect. It was unbearable. After 9 years of fruitless searching, they finally had a real lead, and Clayton Ridge wanted to waste time questioning him instead of pursuing it. It seemed absurd. After the sheriff's SUV disappeared around the ranch road bend, Thomas stood on the porch for a moment, trying to quell the anger bubbling inside him. He glanced at the clock visible through the window. 4 o'clock. The afternoon heat was stifling, and his throat was parched from all the tense conversations. His stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the hunger sharpened. He walked over to the equipment shed, where Manuel was tidying up tools. I'm heading out for a bit, Thomas called, his voice a little sharp. You guys know what to do. Keep working. Manuel looked up with concern, his gaze full of worry. Are you all right, boss? Just need to clear my head. I'll be back later, don't worry. Thomas got into his pickup and headed for town, his thoughts in turmoil. As he drove, he laughed sarcastically, thinking of the sheriff's suggestion that his ranch hands might have helped him bury Savannah's truck. The absurdity of it reignited a surge of anger he barely contained. The Dusty Spur Tavern was located right off the main road, just a 15-minute drive from the ranch. It was a typical local establishment, opening promptly at 4 for farmers and oil workers finishing their shifts. Thomas pulled into the gravel parking lot, noticing only a few cars at this early hour, which was unusual. Inside, the air conditioning offered blissful relief from the suffocating heat. Thomas sat at the bar opposite Jake, the bartender who had been pouring drinks there for as long as anyone could remember. He was part of the place. Whiskey neat, and whatever sandwich you have ready, Thomas said, his voice tired. Jake nodded and glanced at the TV hanging in the corner. The local news was showing footage from a drilling site, the truck being lifted from a hole. It was the lead story. Tom, I saw the news. Is it true? Please don't ask, Thomas interrupted, his patience wearing thin. My head's already pounding. I just came here to unwind. I need some peace. Jake raised his hands in understanding and reached for the remote, changing the channel to a sports review to avoid bothering his customer. Hey, a voice called from the back of the tavern. Why'd you change it? I was watching that. It was interesting. Sorry, Jake said quietly to Thomas, embarrassed, as if apologizing for the inconvenience. The man who complained stood up and walked to the bar, taking a seat one stool away from Thomas. He was younger, perhaps in his mid-40s, with the look of someone who had traveled a long way, his clothes rumpled. He kept glancing at the now-changed TV with obvious disappointment, his interest in the news evident. Thomas studied him, sipping his whiskey, trying to gauge the man before him. The man was clearly interested in the news story, which seemed odd for a stranger. His reaction was too strong. After a moment, Thomas decided to break the ice to ease the tension. Are you local? I don't think I've seen you around here before. The man turned, seemingly grateful for the conversation, his face brightening. No, just got in. Came from New Mexico. He extended a hand. Barry Granger. Thomas shook it. Thomas Walker. What brings you to Alpine? Looking for my brother, actually. Terry Granger. He's a police officer here. Or was anyway, I'm not sure. Thomas nearly choked on his drink, his eyes widening in surprise. Terry Granger from the Highway Patrol? That's him, you know Terry? Barry's face lit up with hope, his eyes gleaming. We worked a case together years ago. It was a long time ago. Thomas vaguely waved a hand towards the TV, as if indicating an invisible connection. That truck they found? It belonged to me. My daughter was driving it when she disappeared. That's her story. Barry's expression changed, reflecting sympathy. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. That's terrible. No wonder Jake changed the channel. It was appropriate. Thomas waved off the apology, his mind on something else. It's all right, but why are you here alone? Where's Terry? Why are you looking for him? That's just it. I can't find him. Barry's frustration was evident, his voice full of annoyance. I've been in Alpine for 2 days. Went to the police station, but they told me Terry resigned 9 years ago. No one seems to know where he went. It's like he vanished. 9 years ago, Thomas frowned, remembering. That number was too familiar. Just like my daughter in that damn truck. Wait, now that you mention it, I remember someone telling me Terry moved to Mexico. That was a long time ago. You're wasting your time if you think I did this. Thomas's voice turned hard as stone. I was here from 8 in the evening until 11, working on ranch accounts. Then I drove out to the pasture, spent about an hour looking around, and came back. And even if I wanted to, which is insane, I'm 62 years old. Do you really think I could have buried a truck under tons of desert sand overnight, unnoticed, leaving no traces without anyone seeing me? The sheriff made a few more notes, not looking up from his pad. What about your ranch hands? Where were they that night? Thomas slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing through the office. Now you're suspecting my whole damn ranch. Manuel has been with me for 20 years. He's like family. The other workers are good, decent people. I'd like to question them again. It's necessary. With all due respect, Sheriff, I don't respect what you're doing right now. You're wasting precious time that should be focused on real leads, on finding the culprits. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes burning. Want to do something truly useful? Pull the CCTV records from the roads around Terlingua and nearby towns for that night. Look for heavy trucks, excavation equipment, something that could have moved enough earth to bury a pickup. That's logical. Sheriff Ridge shook his head, his expression unyielding. That's not necessary at this stage, and we'd have to coordinate with the Terlingua department. That takes time. I know how to do my job. Thomas, believe me. Are you sure? Thomas stood, his voice laced with sarcasm. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're more interested in pointing fingers at me than finding out who actually buried that truck. That doesn't sound like an investigation. The sheriff also stood, closing his notepad as if to punctuate the conversation. I'm following procedure. It's my duty. then follow it somewhere else. Check those road cameras. Talk to the oil company about who knew that well was there. Conduct a real, thorough investigation. Thomas moved toward the door, his patience exhausted. We're done here. If you want to talk to me again, it will only be at the station with Detective Rodriguez present, not before. He escorted the sheriff out of the house and watched him get into his SUV. They didn't shake hands or exchange pleasantries. The farewell was cold. The sheriff's tires kicked up dust as he drove away, leaving Thomas standing on the porch, his fists clenched at his sides, his body tense with anger. The man who was supposed to help find his daughter had just treated him like a suspect. It was unbearable. After 9 years of fruitless searching, they finally had a real lead, and Clayton Ridge wanted to waste time questioning him instead of pursuing it. It seemed absurd. After the sheriff's SUV disappeared around the ranch road bend, Thomas stood on the porch for a moment, trying to quell the anger that was bubbling inside. He glanced at the clock visible through the window. 4 o'clock. The afternoon heat was stifling, and his throat was parched from all the tense conversations. His stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the hunger sharpened. He walked over to the equipment shed, where Manuel was tidying up tools. "I'm heading out for a bit," Thomas called, his voice a little sharp. "You guys know what to do. Keep working." Manuel looked up with concern, his gaze full of worry. "Are you all right, boss? Just need to clear my head. I'll be back later, don't worry." Thomas got into his pickup and headed for town, his thoughts in turmoil. As he drove, he laughed sarcastically, thinking of the sheriff's suggestion that his ranch hands could have helped him bury Savannah's truck. The absurdity of it reignited a surge of anger he barely contained. The Dusty Spur Tavern was located right off the main road, just a 15-minute drive from the ranch. It was a typical local establishment, opening promptly at 4 for farmers and oil workers finishing their shifts. Thomas pulled into the gravel parking lot, noticing only a few cars at this early hour, which was unusual. Inside, the air conditioning offered blissful relief from the suffocating heat. Thomas sat at the bar opposite Jake, the bartender who had been pouring drinks there for as long as anyone could remember. He was part of the place. "Whiskey, neat, and whatever sandwich you have ready," Thomas said, his voice tired. Jake nodded and glanced at the TV hanging in the corner. The local news was showing footage from a drilling site, the truck being lifted from a hole. It was the lead story. "Tom, I saw the news. Is it true?" "Please don't ask," Thomas interrupted, his patience wearing thin. "My head's already pounding. I just came here to unwind. I need some peace." Jake raised his hands in understanding and reached for the remote, changing the channel to a sports review to avoid bothering his customer. "Hey," a voice called from the back of the tavern. "Why'd you change it?" "I was watching that. It was interesting." "Sorry," Jake said quietly to Thomas, embarrassed, as if apologizing for the inconvenience. The man who complained stood up and walked to the bar, taking a seat one stool away from Thomas. He was younger, perhaps in his mid-40s, with the look of someone who had traveled a long way, his clothes rumpled. He continued to glance at the now-changed TV with obvious disappointment, his interest in the news evident. Thomas studied him, sipping his whiskey, trying to gauge the man before him. The man was clearly interested in the news story, which seemed strange for a stranger. His reaction was too strong. After a moment, Thomas decided to break the ice to dispel the tension. "Are you local? I don't think I've seen you around here before." The man turned, seemingly grateful for the conversation, his face brightening. "No, just got in. Came from New Mexico." He extended a hand. "Barry Granger." Thomas shook it. "Thomas Walker. What brings you to Alpine?" "Looking for my brother, actually, Terry Granger. He's a police officer here. Or was, anyway, I'm not sure." Thomas nearly choked on his drink. His eyes widened in surprise. "Terry Granger from the Highway Patrol? That's him. You know Terry?" Barry's face lit up with hope, his eyes gleaming. "We worked a case together years ago. It was a long time ago." Thomas vaguely waved a hand towards the TV, as if indicating an invisible connection. "That truck they found? It belonged to me. My daughter was driving it when she disappeared. That's her story." Barry's expression changed, reflecting sympathy. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. That's terrible." No wonder Jake changed the channel. It was appropriate. Thomas waved off the apology, his thoughts on something else. It's all right, but why are you here alone? Where's Terry? Why are you looking for him? That's just it. I can't find him. Barry's frustration was evident, his voice full of annoyance. I've been in Alpine for 2 days. Went to the police station, but they told me Terry resigned 9 years ago. No one seems to know where he went. It's like he vanished. 9 years ago, Thomas frowned, remembering. That number was too familiar. Just like my daughter in that damn truck. Wait, now that you mention it, I remember someone telling me Terry moved to Mexico. That was a long time ago. Mexico? Barry looked stunned, his eyebrows shooting up. He never told me about that. Why would he just leave without saying anything? No explanation. They sat in silence for a while, Thomas pondering this new information that seemed crucial to him. Terry was one of the officers working highway patrol during the initial investigation into Savannah's disappearance. He had been helpful, pulling CCTV records from the highway. It was his job. Did Terry ever mention anything to you about my daughter's case? Thomas asked, his voice cautious. Barry shook his head. We weren't that close, really. Barely spoke after our parents died. We didn't part on the best terms. He stared at his beer, as if seeking answers within it. My life was pretty messed up back then, but I'm getting it together now. Wanted to reconnect with him, mend things. Only no one knows where he is. It's strange. Someone at the station should know something, Thomas said, his tone confident. I know many of the staff there. Detective Rodriguez worked with me. He'd surely know if Terry really moved to Mexico. It couldn't have gone unnoticed. I appreciate that, but you have your own problems, Mr. Walker. I shouldn't burden you with mine. It's unfair. It's no problem. Thomas finished his whiskey as the news on the TV switched to the weather forecast, and he felt it was time to act. Listen, you need help finding your brother, and I need to talk to the detective anyway after my run-in with the sheriff. It's necessary. Jake brought the bill, but Barry snatched it before Thomas could reach for his wallet. Least I can do, Barry said, his voice sincere. Thanks, Thomas stood. Do you have a car? No. Took a taxi from the motel. I'm without transport. Then come with me. The station's not far from here. We'll see what the detective knows about Terry. It's our chance. Barry's relief was palpable, his face brightening. Thanks. Really? That would be great. They walked out of the bar together, stepping into the sweltering late afternoon heat that enveloped the town. As Thomas opened his truck door, a nagging feeling, like a premonition, washed over him. Terry's sudden departure that same year, so soon after Savannah's disappearance, seemed like more than just a coincidence. It was too suspicious. The Alpine police station was a modest brick building, serving the community since the 1970s, its walls having witnessed much. Thomas pulled into the visitor parking lot, noticing how much livelier it seemed than during his morning visit to the drilling site when he'd driven past the station. He and Barry walked through the glass doors into the lobby. Officer Patricia Hernandez was at the front desk, whom Thomas had known since she was a rookie, quite young. She looked up from her computer with a professional smile that faltered slightly when she recognized him, as if anticipating new problems. Mr. Walker, back again today. Something happened? Patricia, I need to see Detective Rodriguez. Is he here on site? She glanced at her computer screen. Actually, he stepped out about an hour ago, but I can reach him if you need to speak with him urgently. It's no problem. Thomas gestured to Barry. This is Barry Granger. He's looking for his brother, Officer Terry Granger. I'm trying to help him with that. Patricia's expression shifted to recognition as she looked at Barry, as if remembering him. Oh, yes, Mr. Granger. You came in yesterday, asking about Officer Granger. She spoke with practiced patience, as if repeating the same thing many times. As I told you then, we don't have any information about his relocation. He left the department 9 years ago, and that's it. I know, Barry said, his voice full of despair, but I was hoping someone might be able to tell me more about when he resigned, where he moved, anything. Patricia shook her head sympathetically. The only people who might have that information are Detective Rodriguez or Sheriff Ridge. They were here when Officer Granger left. They should know. Thomas felt his jaw clench at the mention of the sheriff, remembering their heated argument just hours ago, anger rising again. Nevertheless, he had to ask, "Is the sheriff in his office?" "He hasn't returned yet, but he should be here any minute. He doesn't usually stay away from the station for long, especially with everything happening today. It's unusual." Barry touched Thomas's arm, his gaze full of doubt. "Look, you've bothered yourself enough for me. Let's go. I'll manage somehow. I don't want to burden you." But Patricia was already pointing out the window, her voice confident. "Actually, that's him pulling up now. I told you he wouldn't be long. He's punctual." Thomas and Barry moved toward the door to intercept the sheriff. Through the glass, they watched Sheriff Ridge's SUV pull into a parking spot just a few feet from Thomas's truck. They stepped out into the late afternoon heat, expecting the sheriff to exit his vehicle immediately. But he didn't. They could see the sheriff's silhouette through the tinted windows. He was apparently on the phone, his figure motionless. They stood awkwardly by the station entrance, waiting as time stretched on. "Maybe we should wait inside," Barry suggested after a minute, his voice quiet. "I need to grab something from my truck anyway," Thomas said. "My phone charger. The battery's been draining all day with all these calls. It's inconvenient." He walked across the parking lot, fishing his keys from his pocket. The sheriff's SUV was parked with its windows slightly ajar for ventilation, and as Thomas passed it, he heard the sheriff's voice drifting through the warm air, the words distinct. He tried not to eavesdrop, but the words were clearly audible in the quiet parking lot, as if the sheriff didn't care about privacy. "Get this handled quickly," the sheriff was saying, his voice strained. "Bones?" "Yes. Find Bones." Thomas fumbled with his keys, trying to focus on his own business, ignoring what he heard. The sheriff was probably discussing another case. After all, the man had an entire county to manage. It was his duty. "No, I'm not leaving town." "All right, good." The voice from the car speaker was harder to make out. It was muffled, just a tiny male voice responding to the sheriff, as if from a distance. Thomas felt a pang of embarrassment for the sheriff. The man probably didn't realize how well sound carried from his vehicle. It was careless. He'd have to discreetly mention it later for privacy's sake. It was important. Thomas opened his truck door and reached for his phone charger in the center console. He was about to turn back when more word from the sheriff's car made him freeze. "Not Terry Granger. Nobody cares. Don't worry. New guy in the office." "Yeah." Thomas froze, his hand still on the truck door, his heart pounding faster. Terry Granger. Why was the sheriff discussing Barry's missing brother? And in such context, the sheriff's engine suddenly roared, breaking the silence. Thomas looked up to see the SUV pulling out of its spot, accelerating sharply. Barry ran towards him from the station entrance, his face full of questions. "Is that really the sheriff? He's leaving again. Where's he rushing off to?" Thomas's thoughts spun like a whirlwind. The sheriff was discussing Bones, telling someone to handle something quickly, and then Terry Granger's name. None of it felt right. It was all highly suspicious. "Get in the truck," Thomas said urgently, his voice strained. "What? Why?" Barry was puzzled. "I think I overheard something I shouldn't have. Just get in, no questions." Barry didn't argue further, obeying his tone. They both climbed into Thomas's truck, and he started the engine, pulling out of the parking lot just as the sheriff's SUV turned onto the main road, disappearing from view. "What did you hear?" Barry asked as they followed at a distance, his voice filled with alarm. "Your brother's name," Thomas said, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, his gaze fixed on the road. "The sheriff was talking about Terry Granger. Said nobody cared about him." Barry's face paled, as if drained of blood. "What else?" "Something about Bones, and handling something quickly. It was strange." Thomas kept his eyes on the sheriff's vehicle ahead, his suspicions mounting. "Barry, I don't like this. Your brother disappeared around the same time as my daughter. The sheriff came to my house, accusing me of kidnapping my own daughter, and now he's having secret conversations about your brother. Something's not right here. It's obvious." They drove in tense silence, both men pondering the implications of what Thomas had overheard, their minds in turmoil. Thomas maintained a safe distance behind the sheriff's SUV, trying to blend into the sparse evening traffic to avoid being noticed. The sheriff was speeding, weaving through the few cars on the road with such urgency that Thomas's suspicions grew with each passing minute. "He's driving like he's in a desperate hurry," Barry observed, clutching the door handle as Thomas pressed the gas to keep up, their speed increasing. Or try to get somewhere before someone else does, Thomas muttered, his voice filled with foreboding. I'll try calling him, Thomas said, pulling out his phone with one hand, keeping the other on the wheel, his resolve unwavering. Maybe there's an explanation. That would be logical. He found a sheriff's number and dialed. From the distance between their vehicles, he saw the sheriff's hand reach for his phone, glance at it, and then put it aside, ignoring the call. The call went to voicemail. He's ignoring me, Thomas said, his voice filled with frustration. As they crested a small hill, he saw the sheriff still on his phone, gesturing with one hand, as if explaining something important. Try the detective, Barry suggested, his voice hopeful. Thomas dialed Rodriguez's number, putting it on speaker as soon as the call connected so Barry could hear too. Thomas, the detective answered, his voice businesslike. I assume you're calling about the drill site. We're processing the evidence as quickly as possible. It's a priority. No, Thomas interrupted, his voice strained. Actually, I need to ask you about something else. Do you remember Officer Terry Granger? A long, tense pause followed. When Rodriguez spoke again, his voice was cautious, as if he were choosing his words. Terry Granger? Yes, I remember him. He moved to Mexico about 8 years ago. It was quite sudden, as I recall. Barry leaned into the phone, his voice full of hope. Detective Rodriguez. This is Barry Granger, Terry's brother. I came here to find him. Everyone says he went to Mexico, but it doesn't make sense. It's not like him. I'm sorry, Mr. Granger, but that's what we were told. He said he wanted to find a different calling, try something new in life. No way, Barry said firmly, his voice full of conviction. Terry loved being a cop. He was so proud of that badge. Always said he'd work until he dropped. It was his calling. Why is this important right now? Rodriguez asked, his voice filled with bewilderment. Thomas explained his afternoon confrontation with the sheriff, the strange accusations, and what he'd overheard in the parking lot. Every detail. We're following him now. Something's not right here, detective. It's obvious. You're following Sheriff Ridge, Thomas. That's a bad idea. You should. He's turning, Barry interrupted, his voice filled with excitement. They watched as the sheriff's SUV slowed and turned onto a dirt road leading to an old farmhouse, barely visible in the deepening twilight, its outlines unclear. Detective, I'll call you back, Thomas said, ending the call, his decision made. He slowed the truck, looking for a place to pull off the road. About 100 yards from the farm entrance, he found a cluster of mesquite trees that provided perfect cover. He killed the engine and turned off the headlights, plunging them into darkness. What are we doing? Barry whispered, his voice filled with alarm. Watching, Thomas replied, his voice firm and determined. Something's happening here. It's obvious. In the deepening twilight, they could now see the farmhouse more clearly. It was run down, but not abandoned. Lights were on in the windows, and cars were parked outside, indicating people were present. The sheriff's SUV stopped halfway to the house, and another car approached from the opposite direction, as if on cue. Look, Barry pointed, his voice strained. Several men got out of the newly arrived car. Thomas counted 3, maybe 4 figures in the dim light, their outlines indistinct. They went to the back seat of their vehicle and pulled someone out. Even from their distance, it was clear the person was bound. Their movements were restricted. They stumbled as they were dragged between the men, like a limp doll. My God, Barry breathed, his voice filled with horror. Is that person blindfolded? Thomas squinted, wishing he had binoculars to make out the details. The figures moved towards the sheriff's SUV, and with growing dread, they watched as the bound person was loaded into the trunk. The sheriff didn't even get out of his vehicle, remaining inside. What the hell is going on? Barry's voice trembled with shock. They watched as the sheriff's SUV drove away from the farmhouse, continuing down the road in the direction they had been heading. The other car turned around and headed back towards town, disappearing into the darkness. Call Rodriguez right now, Thomas said, his voice filled with determination. Barry was already dialing, his fingers shaking. When the detective answered, Thomas grabbed the phone. Detective, we just saw Sheriff Ridge take what looks like a kidnapped person. They loaded someone bound and blindfolded into his trunk at the old farm off Highway 67. It was horrifying. Thomas, that's a serious accusation. Are you absolutely sure of what you saw? No mistake. 2 eyes can be wrong, Thomas said grimly, his voice firm. But 4 eyes won't miss a detail like that. Barry saw it too. He's a witness. Barry nodded vigorously, though the detective couldn't see him. Confirmed. Someone was transferred from one car to the sheriff's car. They were definitely bound, no doubt about it. Rodriguez's voice became businesslike, his tone changing. If what you're saying is true, I'll have to issue an immediate bolo. All units will be alerted to stop the sheriff's vehicle. It will be a priority. Do it, Thomas said, his voice filled with determination. I'm sending units to your location right now. If the sheriff is on that road, he's heading towards one of the few exits from Alpine. We can set up roadblocks to intercept him. Can you do it discreetly? Thomas asked. So he doesn't know what's coming. That's important. It depends on how many loyal people he has in dispatch, but it doesn't matter. The alert will ensure he's stopped. I'll handle this personally. It's my responsibility. Rodriguez paused. Thomas, Barry, it's getting dark. You should head back now. Let us handle this. It's dangerous. Thomas started the engine, pulling back onto the road, his decision made. If that person in his trunk is Terry or my daughter Savannah, I'm not backing down. Just be quick, detective. We'll be safe, don't worry. Thomas, we will be careful, Thomas said and ended the call. He pressed the gas pedal, following the sheriff's taillights in the distance as darkness descended upon the Texas landscape, shrouding it in mystery. Thomas kept Detective Rodriguez on speaker as they continued to pursue the sheriff's SUV through the darkening Texas landscape, which grew increasingly grim. The detective's voice crackled through the phone, coordinating units and staying in touch with them, his commands clear. He's heading towards the county line exit, Thomas reported, his voice strained. But just as he said it, the sheriff's brake lights flashed, and the SUV suddenly turned onto another road, changing direction. He changed direction, Barry said urgently, his voice filled with alarm. He's not leaving town. He stayed here. Rodriguez's voice was grim. He understood what had happened. Someone at the station must have warned him about the bolo. Keep following, but maintain your distance. Don't get too close. They drove for another 10 minutes through increasingly desolate terrain, where not a soul was in sight. The sheriff's car finally slowed, turning onto a rough dirt road, leading to what looked like an abandoned ranch, its outlines barely discernible. Thomas could make out the silhouettes of buildings against the darkening sky. The main house and several outbuildings, including what appear to be old stables, their shapes unclear. Detective, he's pulled into an abandoned ranch, Thomas reported, giving the exact location. Looks like the old Hartley place. It's been vacant for years. No one lives there. Units are en route, Rodriguez replied, his voice firm. Do not approach. I repeat, do not approach the buildings. It's dangerous. Thomas pulled off the road about 200 yards from the ranch entrance, parking behind thick brush to remain unseen. They watched as the sheriff's SUV stopped near one of the stables, its headlights illuminating the old walls. In the dim light, they saw Sheriff Ridge get out of the car and walk to the trunk, his movements slow. The sheriff struggled with the weight of the person he pulled out. The bound figure was limp, either unconscious or too weak to resist. It simply hung in his arms. He half-carried, half-dragged it towards the dark stable entrance, its silhouette disappearing into the darkness. I need to get closer, Thomas said, reaching for the door handle, his resolve unwavering. Barry grabbed his arm, his grip firm. Thomas, this is the limit. You heard the detective. It's dangerous. My daughter might be in there. I have to check. Maybe, or it's a trap. We wait for backup. It's our only chance. Barry's grip was tight. He wouldn't let go. Please, Thomas. We come this far. Don't do anything that could get us all killed. It's insane. Thomas's hands clenched into fists, but he remained in the truck, understanding Barry's point. Minutes stretched like hours as they watched the stable, seeing occasional movements of flashlight beams through cracks in the walls, as if someone was moving inside. Then, like ghosts in the darkness, police cars appeared. No sirens, no lights, just shadows converging on the ranch, their movements silent. Officers exited and quickly surrounded the buildings, their movements precise and coordinated, as if they were a single organism. "They're here," Barry breathed, his voice filled with relief. Thomas and Barry got out of the truck and were immediately met by an officer who held up a hand. "Stay here, gentlemen, for your safety. That's an order." From inside the stable came sounds that chilled Thomas to the bone. Cries for help, sounds of struggle, and a voice calling for assistance, full of desperation. The voice was female, there was no doubt. "Go, go, go," someone shouted, and officers stormed the stable, bursting inside. The next few minutes were chaos. Screams, sounds of struggle, more officers calling for backup and medical assistance, all blended into a single din. Thomas found himself moving forward despite the officer's warning, Barry right beside him, supporting him. Sheriff Ridge was let out in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage. He was furious. When he spotted Thomas, his expression turned venomous, full of hatred. "You'll regret this, Walker," he snarled, his voice full of menace. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. You just signed your own." "Shut up," one of the officers said, pushing him towards a patrol car to silence him. Another officer emerged from the sheriff's SUV, holding a phone, his face serious. "Detective Rodriguez needs to see this," he called out. "The sheriff's messages. They talk about getting a woman out of town and something about planting bones. It's important." Rodriguez himself arrived moments later, took the phone, and scrolled through it with growing alarm, his eyes scanning the screen. He looked at the sheriff, his gaze full of contempt. "Do you want to tell us who you were conspiring with? These messages are quite clear. They incriminate you." The sheriff's jaw clenched. He refused to speak, his silence eloquent. Barry stepped forward, his voice full of determination. "We know where he met them before, at that farm. I'm not familiar with the exact roads." But Thomas pulled out his phone, opening his GPS app. "Here," he said, showing the detective the marked location. "That's exactly where we saw the transfer. It's the precise spot." At that moment, officers emerged from the stable, supporting a woman between them. Even in the dim light, even after 9 years, Thomas recognized her. "Savannah," he breathed, his voice filled with incredible relief. She was thin, frighteningly thin, her clothes dirty and torn. But she was alive. That was what mattered. The arriving medical team immediately took her into their care, guiding her towards the newly arrived ambulance, whose lights painted the scene alternately red and white, creating a surreal picture. One of the officers checking the sheriff's phone suddenly looked up, his face full of surprise. "Detective, we just got a message. Someone sent coordinates. Says they're burying bones there. It's important." "Bingo," Rodriguez said grimly, his voice full of anticipation. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, I need several backup units and a tactical team. We're raiding what appears to be a drug trafficking operation. That's our target." He looked at the sheriff's phone again. The messages mentioned drug payments and monthly retainers, and "I need another team at these coordinates to intercept suspects trying to bury remains. That's a priority." Several officers prepared for the raid, their movements swift. Barry urgently approached them, his face full of determination. "I'm coming with you. If this is connected to the farm, my brother might be there. I have to check." "Sir, this is a tactical operation. It's too dangerous." "My brother is Officer Terry Granger," Barry insisted, his voice full of conviction. "He might be with these people. I have to find out." The lead officer looked at Rodriguez, who nodded, giving permission. "Everyone knows Terry. We'll identify him if he's there, don't worry. But you cannot participate in the raid, Mr. Granger. It's too dangerous. We'll contact you as soon as it's safe. That's a promise." Barry's shoulders slumped, his face showing disappointment. "I hope you don't find him there. I hope he really is in Mexico. That would be better." Thomas barely heard this conversation, his attention completely absorbed by something else. He was already moving towards the ambulance where Savannah was being attended to. She looked more stable now, and four in her arm, medics checking her vitals, their movements professional. When she saw him approaching, she tried to stand despite the medics' protests, her eyes full of tears. She swayed, and Thomas rushed forward to catch her, his arms wrapping around her. Then she was in his embrace, her face buried in his neck, her body shaking with sobs, as if releasing all the pent-up emotions. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dad, I knew you'd find me. I knew you wouldn't give up, I believed." The medic gently said, "Sir, she's been sedated, but it's wearing off. She's experienced significant trauma and needs immediate hospitalization. It's necessary." Rodriguez followed Thomas and now stood nearby with his notepad ready, prepared to record. Savannah looked at him through her tears, her gaze full of pain. "The sheriff," she began, her voice breaking as if she found it hard to speak. "He used me. At first, they wanted to kill me, but he told them not to. He told them to keep me alive for his visits. It was horrible." Thomas felt rage building in his chest, but kept his voice soft so as not to scare her. "Who are they, honey?" "Drug traffickers. Miguel Salazar is their leader. They kept me on their farm in a hidden bunker built into an old grain silo. No one would have guessed." She looked at Rodriguez, her gaze full of accusation. "The sheriff is corrupt. He helped them operate, covered for them, made investigations disappear. He was their accomplice. In return, they paid him every month, and they kept me alive. They call me the sheriff's toy." Rodriguez wrote quickly, his face grim, shocked by what he heard. "We'll catch them all, Miss Walker. Our teams are already moving on their locations. It's only a matter of time." The medic gently interrupted. "We really need to transport her now. It's urgent." Thomas looked at Barry, pulled his truck keys from his pocket, and tossed them to him. "Use it as long as you need. I'm going with her. I have to be there." Barry caught the keys, nodding in understanding, his face showing sympathy. Thomas climbed into the ambulance beside his daughter, taking her hand while the medics continued their work, caring for her. As the doors closed and they drove away from the nightmarish scene, he began to explain everything that had happened since that morning. The discovery of her truck, the sheriff's suspicious behavior, meeting Barry, and the chase that led to her rescue. He recounted everything in detail. Savannah weakly squeezed his hand. "I want to tell the police everything," she said, her voice weak but determined. "After they fix me up, I want to help put him away for good so he can't hurt anyone else." The emergency room at Alpine General Hospital was a flurry of activity, voices and movement blending into a single din. Thomas watched helplessly as the medical team wheeled Savannah away for examination and treatment, her figure disappearing behind a door. He found himself in the waiting room, sinking into an uncomfortable plastic chair that had seen too many worried families. His back ached. For the first time since he'd seen the police car arrive at his ranch that afternoon, Thomas was left only to think, his mind free from the need to act. The rage that had smoldered beneath his forced calm began to boil, rising from deep within. 9 years. 9 years of his daughter's suffering while that bastard sheriff played the role of a concerned lawman, pretending to investigate, pretending to care. It was unbearable. The antiseptic smell of the hospital was suffocating, making him nauseous. Thomas abruptly stood and headed for the exit, needing air to clear his lungs. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes he kept in his jacket for emergencies, though he'd quit long ago. He'd quit smoking years ago, but some habits die hard, especially in stressful situations. He was just about to light one when a voice called out, "Mr. Walker." Thomas turned to see a doctor in scrubs approaching, his face serious. He quickly shoved the cigarette back into his pocket, hiding it. "I'm Dr. Veen. I've examined your daughter. I just finished. How is she?" Thomas was filled with anxiety. The doctor's expression was carefully professional, but Thomas saw the underlying anger, the fury at what had transpired. Physically, she's emaciated and severely underweight. There's evidence of repeated physical abuse, old fractures that healed improperly, scars consistent with binding marks. It's horrific. He paused, collecting his thoughts. She's also developed infections in her reproductive system, including STDs. There are also respiratory issues, likely from prolonged chemical exposure. We understand she was kept in a silo where drugs were stored. That explains a lot. Thomas felt his knees buckle. He could barely stand. He reached for the wall to steady himself, his body trembling. She's stable now, Dr. Chin quickly continued, his voice reassuring. We've started treating the infections and begun nutritional therapy, but she'll need to remain in the hospital throughout her treatment, at least a week, possibly longer, to fully recover. Can I see her? Thomas asked, his voice hoarse. Of course. We've moved her to room 314. She's been asking for you. She's waiting. Thomas followed the doctor through a maze of corridors, his heart beating faster. When they reached the room, Dr. Chin stopped at the door. She's endured unimaginable trauma, Mr. Walker. Recovery will take time, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. It will be a long road. Thomas nodded, his throat too constricted to speak, words stuck within him. The doctor left, and Thomas entered the room. Savannah looked small in the hospital bed, and 4 attached to her arm, monitors tracking her vitals, but her eyes were alert, and when she saw him, she tried to smile, her face pale. Dad. He walked to her bedside, pulling a chair closer. I'm here, honey. I'm here. I'm sorry, she whispered, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. I'm so sorry I didn't come home that night. I didn't mean to. No. Thomas gently took her hand, mindful of how fragile she seemed. Don't you dare apologize. I'm the one who should be apologizing. I looked for you that night. Saw you were gone. But I thought you just went somewhere else. Maybe camping or into town. I never imagined someone would take you. It was unthinkable. His voice cracked. He was barely holding back tears. If I had called the police that night, instead of waiting until morning. Stop. Savannah's grip on his hand tightened slightly, her gaze firm. If anyone's to blame, it's Sheriff Ridge. He was supposed to protect people. Instead, he used his badge for evil, for his own purposes. Her eyes hardened with a strength that surprised him. A fire burned within them. He's the monster here, Dad, not you. A knock on the door interrupted them. A young officer hesitantly entered, his gaze uncertain. Excuse me. Detective Rodriguez sent me to take Miss Walker's statement when she's ready. It's urgent. Thomas stood, his protective instinct flaring. He was ready for a fight. With all due respect, officer, given what happened with the sheriff and the sensitive nature of this case, I prefer to wait for Detective Rodriguez himself. That would be more appropriate. The officer nodded, understanding his words. I'll let him know, sir, don't worry. Hours passed, stretching endlessly. Thomas dozed restlessly in the chair beside Savannah's bed, waking each time she moved or made a sound, his sleep light. Finally, around midnight, Detective Rodriguez arrived, looking exhausted but determined, his face tired. He was accompanied by another officer carrying recording equipment, ready to work. Sorry for the delay, Rodriguez said. It's been a long night of arrests and interrogations, very intense. I understand, Thomas said, his voice filled with sympathy. Savannah sat up slightly in bed, preparing to speak. I want to tell you everything about that night, every detail. Rodriguez and the officers set up their equipment, and Savannah began her account, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, gaining confidence. I was moving cattle that evening, as usual. I left in the truck around 8 p.m. with feed, heading to our far western pasture. It was a clear night, good visibility. She paused, collecting her thoughts, her gaze focused. It was a drug deal. I saw men transferring packages between vehicles. I'd never seen any of them before, but I knew I needed to get out of there immediately. I ran to my truck, leaving the cattle. There was no time to round them up, but one of them saw me. Miguel Salazar, it was him. I tried to drive away, but he chased me in his pickup with all his lights off. Blackout mode. He rammed my truck from behind, pushing me off the road. Before I could do anything, he pulled me out of the cab. He zip-tied my hands and blindfolded me. I couldn't see anything. I heard him call someone on a radio. He kept repeating, "Sheriff, we have a problem." That's when I realized it was Sheriff Ridge. He came to the farm where they took me. I heard them arguing about what to do with me. Miguel wanted to kill me and dump the truck somewhere deep in the desert, but the sheriff, her voice trembled, recalling the horror. He said he wanted me for himself, told them to keep me alive for his visits. That was his condition. Miguel argued I was a liability, but the sheriff reminded him of all the times he'd covered for them, cleaned up their messes, diverted investigations. He said they owed him this, to keep me safe and alive for his entertainment in addition to the money they were already paying him. That was his price. Detective Rodriguez's face was stone as he took notes, his expression serious. They kept me in a hidden bunker built into a grain silo on the farm. I heard them planning to bury my truck to cover their tracks. The sheriff told them about the abandoned drilling pad outside Terlingua. Said the hole was already there. They just needed to dump the truck and fill it in. That was his suggestion. She looked at her father, her gaze full of pain. After that, things got blurry. They moved me between different properties over the years. Most of the time, they kept me sedated. There was a woman, a nurse, who worked for the cartel. She kept me alive, treated my injuries. They killed her last year when she showed too much compassion. She was too kind. My God, Thomas muttered, his voice filled with horror. Rodriguez looked up from his notes. Miss Walker, your account matches what Miguel Salazar told us tonight. It corroborates your story. He confirmed they used heavy trucks to fill that oil well with desert sand, working through the night. The sheriff manipulated all the road camera records to cover their tracks. That was his job. Thomas found his voice strained. What about Terry Granger? He worked highway patrol. Was he helping the sheriff? Was he his accomplice? Rodriguez's expression grew even grimmer, full of regret. We found Terry at the farm tonight. He's alive, but barely. Apparently, Terry grew suspicious when the sheriff requested specific road camera records and seemed intent on controlling the investigation. It raised his suspicions. When Terry confronted him, the sheriff arranged for the cartel to take him. They faked his sudden departure to Mexico, so no one would look for him. Oh my God, Thomas breathed, his voice filled with shock. Terry was forced to work at their drug production for 8 years. He has numerous whip scars, old and new. They mutilated his fingers and toes to ensure obedience. It was horrific. Rodriguez shook his head, his face full of disgust. He's here at the hospital too, in another wing. His brother Barry is with him. He's by his side. Will he be okay? Thomas asked, his voice filled with hope. Physically, he'll recover. Mentally, that's another story. It will be a long road. Rodriguez pulled out his phone, showing them photos, his face serious. There's something else. We intercepted Salazar's men tonight at another location. They were burying bones mixed with women's clothing and boots similar to what Savannah wore. It was their cover. Savannah gasped, her hand covering her mouth. They were going to fake my death so no one would look for me. Our forensic expert confirmed the bones are from pigs. Femur bones and ribs can closely resemble human remains when fragmented and decomposed. Common enough in Texas to fool anyone. The plan was to move you across the border tonight, creating false evidence to make us think you were dead. To close the case for good. That was their ultimate plan. The weight of how close they had come to losing everything hung over the room like a suffocating cloud. After Rodriguez and his team left with Savannah's full statement, Thomas sat with his daughter until she fell asleep, exhausted by her ordeal, her breathing even. He stood in the hallway, trying to process everything that had happened, when he saw a familiar figure approaching. Barry Granger looked as exhausted as Thomas, but relief shone in his eyes, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Thomas, Barry said, extending a hand. I wanted to thank you. If we hadn't met in that bar, if you hadn't overheard the sheriff, I would never have found Terry. He would have remained captive. Thomas shook his hand, his gaze full of sympathy. How is he? Is he alive? That's the main thing that matters. Barry's voice trembled with emotion. He was barely holding back tears. 8 years of hell, but he's alive. It's a miracle. They stood together in the quiet hospital corridor, like two pillars supporting each other. Two men, bound by an incredible chain of events that uncovered deep corruption and saved 2 lives. It was unbelievable. Rodriguez told me everything. Barry continued, about the pig bones, about the plan to move your daughter tonight. We stopped it just in time at the last moment. We will fight this, Thomas said firmly, his voice full of determination. We'll make sure Ridge and every one of them pay for what they did. They will face justice." Barry nodded, his face serious. Rodriguez mentioned they're bringing in state investigators to audit the entire police department. To root out any other corruption, it's necessary. They stood in companionable silence, both processing the night's revelations, their minds in turmoil. Sometimes evil wore a badge and hid behind authority, seeming unassailable. But today, two ordinary men who refused to give up brought that evil to light, exposing it. "Thank you," Barry said again, his voice full of gratitude, "for not giving up, for following your instincts. It saved us." Thomas looked back at Savannah's room, his gaze full of tenderness. A father doesn't give up on his daughter, and a brother doesn't give up on his brother. That's the law. Barry smiled sadly. No, they don't give up, ever. In the end, this simple truth proved stronger than years of corruption and violence that had seemed invincible. Love and determination triumphed where evil had seemed unassailable. They won. It wasn't a perfect victory. Scars would remain for life, a reminder of what they had endured. But Savannah was alive. Terry was free, and justice had finally prevailed, albeit belatedly. The two men shook hands again, united in their resolve to see this through, so no other family would suffer as theirs had. That was their promise.